All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We're your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa. And we're here today to talk about a movie I had somehow never seen before this week. And thanks to Daniel, that has been corrected.
Yes. Yeah, we are here to talk about a movie released in 1999 called Idle Hands.
I remember when this movie came out. And I don't know if I was its target audience because I was just a wee lad of about 13 years old, 12 or 13.
Right.
And I remember seeing the commercials for it, having a definite knowledge of who Devon Sawa was, knowing
Casper the Friendly Ghost.
He was Casper the Friendly Ghost. Knowing definitely who Vivica A. Fox was because I was already very familiar with all of Schwarzenegger's work.
Yes.
And so she was in Eraser, I think a year or two before, and I had fallen in love with her.
As one does.
And I want to say I was already familiar with Seth Green, but I don't know from where. I think that you're just born knowing about Seth Green.
Seth Green's just that guy that like is always there. Like everybody kind of knows who Seth Green is.
Yeah.
Especially in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I was 16 when this dropped. So I was very much target audience. And while I did not contribute to the stunning $4 million that it made in the box office as it was rated R and I was 16, I remember when it came out, like me and my buddy got it on VHS and we wore this thing out.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it was, I just remember being like equal parts, like really excited to be able to just see the commercials. Because I didn't know who Jessica Alba was yet. I would become obsessed with her a year later when she was on Dark Angel.
Yes, this was most people's intro. This was like the world's kind of introduction to Jessica Alba.
Right. How old was she when she did this? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head. I can find out.
Yeah, I just wonder if the way I felt watching this was okay.
She was born in 81, so she was 18.
Okay, all right. So I probably shouldn't feel okay with myself for the way that I felt watching this movie.
No, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like now we look back, but at the time you were the right age to be. I mean, you were the right age. Like I go through this all the time with how smoking hot Lacey Chabert is. And, and then and then you look back and it's like, man, she's always been, and then it's like, but if I go back to Party of Five, that's too early. But it's like, but wait, I was the right age then. So it's okay.
Yeah. It's, and especially looking back on these things, it's a very tricky thing.
It is. It's weird.
It's a very tricky thing. So, the only person who I think I wouldn't have known at the time is Eldon Hansen.
Yes.
Who I know now mostly from Daredevil.
As Foggy Nelson, yeah.
As Foggy Nelson. And he's a fantastic Foggy Nelson.
Yes.
And I want to say he was my favorite character in this movie.
Peanut. It's so good.
Yeah.
So just for anybody who may not be familiar with Idle Hands, but you listen anyway, and if you are, we appreciate you. Idle Hands was a movie released in 1999 where Devon Sawa plays a guy named Anton who is a lazy waste of human space. He smokes pot, he watches TV, and that's it. Like at one point, he brings up the fact that the only memories he has are smoking pot and watching TV. His hand gets possessed by the devil. He murders people. That's the only synopsis. You really need to understand everything we're about to discuss in this movie. But you do have to understand that it is literally
that is the only synopsis, because there is no more information given.
The only little bit of extra we can give you is it's literally only his hand that is possessed. Like, he's not like a demon who's out killing people. His hand is acting independently and killing people because just his hand is possessed. Imagine if the idea for this movie had to come from somebody who saw Evil Dead 2 and was like,
absolutely.
You know that one scene where Bruce Campbell fought his hand? What if that were like a whole fucking movie?
And the interesting thing is that they kind of expanded upon that on Ash versus the Evil Dead.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they brought the hand back in I think it was the first season of the show. And the hand was a major character.
I love it.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and I definitely got those vibes. You can tell that there were definite like spoofs and throwbacks to older movies. You saw things like Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead on the television in the background. The scene where, the spoiler alert, Devon Sawa chops his hand off with a cleaver. Yes. I got definite Evil Dead 2 vibes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially because we see, Eldon Hansen like clamp down on the hand. He's like, ah, and he's got that look in his eyes, that crazed look in his eye, the same way that Bruce Campbell does in that one particular scene. I really like this movie. Yeah. I was really surprised by how much I like this movie. I don't think of myself as a stoner comedy guy.
Right.
I appreciate it, like I could do the Cheech and Chong stuff. I know Kevin Smith, some of his stuff, has been called,
Little Dazed and Confused.
Dazed and Confused, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, Pineapple Express. I can do some of the stoner stuff. I went to college, so I can appreciate some of this.
I have experience.
But I was really surprised how this, number one, the amount of stoner humor that was in this, but also how much of it was just plain old funny.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to be a stoner to really appreciate this.
I agree. It's this movie sits at 15% on Rotten Tomatoes, which we've said over and over again on this show and in Geekmore. We don't put a ton of weight into that, but it is something out there that exists, so that there are metrics. But the audience is like a 52%, right? Which is where I would anticipate this to be, because the people who like this movie are going to really like it. This movie, like I said, wore it out when I was like 16, 17. We watched this movie all the time. And then I probably haven't seen it since. A frame of reference, I'm 38 now. So I went.
Lots of times passed.
Yeah. So I went to turn this on expecting to like chuckle, but also just anxiously, maybe not anxiously, but like just like nervously awaiting that moment that was going to be where it was like, that did not aid of, a couple of words that they use. They do use the R word at one point. But outside of just a very little bit of language, this movie aged really well. Like that teenage comedy from the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of that aged very, very poorly, especially in light of everything that are, that the people are socially conscious of right now. Mm-hmm. This movie managed to avoid a lot of that. It is a movie that I turned on last night for like the first time in 20 plus years, and I was still laughing hysterically. I enjoyed so much about this movie. Like I said, going back, even as an adult now, it's still creepy, because she was 18, but you look back and it's like Jessica Alba in this movie, she only exists to like embody the idea of this teenage boy fantasy, right? Like she's like so turned on when the devil hand slaps her ass, like without Devon Sawa wanting to, that she like throws him on the bed and mounts him. And it's like, yeah, bro, that's not how it works, but I get that that's how it works for this movie.
Like, the interesting thing there is that like he is horrified.
Yes.
right? So it's not that, I don't think that sort of behavior is being glorified.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
in any way.
Because he's trying to
which
fight
often oftentimes in these teen movies, particularly the teen movies of the 80s and the 90s, right? I'm thinking like Porky's
your Porky's
Paw,
to your American Pies.
right? Yeah, they tend to be like, really offensive.
Yeah, like they're the type of movies where the phrase "boys will be boys" is embodied.
And I mean, granted, that's part of what the charm of the movies was, and I think still is. They exist in this weird time capsule. But something like Porky's wouldn't work today.
Right.
I think that if a teenager were watching Porky's today, they would probably not be okay with it. Right.
Yeah, I would think not.
And probably the same thing with American Pie, whereas you and I can watch these movies and we can still kind of disassociate that,
Yeah, you can
and watch it, nostalgically.
Yeah.
And say, oh, okay, I had such a great time when I watched this movie before. Obviously, we're a little bit more enlightened now. But Devon Sawa was like horrified at the fact that like his hand just did this. And of course, Alba isn't like necessarily turned on by the slap, because we see her like taken aback at first.
Right.
She's like, okay, but it's the fact that like he went for it.
Yeah, because I didn't think he'd have the balls.
Shy. Yeah, he's been so shy up until now, and then all of a sudden, like here he is making moves. Even if they're the wrong moves, like he's putting all his eggs in her breadbasket, as it were.
Yeah, and it's this. Like I said, I was surprised to find out when I did look it up on Rotten Tomatoes and find out it was a 15%. But then when I stopped and thought about it, I was like, really, I'm not, because a movie critic isn't who this movie was made for. This movie was made for 16-year-old me who, like I said, got this thing on VHS. And I was into sexy ladies. I was into scary movies. I like laughing. It was like it was. So when you look at this movie on a $25 million budget, making $4 million in the box office and a 15% Rotten Tomatoes score, it's like, wow, that's a flop. But it's one of those movies that it wasn't made for the theaters. This was tailor made for the group of kids that are going to buy it and just watch it over and over again. And it actually recently, I found out today, it did get a 20-year anniversary Blu-ray release with a ton of special features. And now I kind of want to go find this Blu-ray and watch these special features, because it's apparently chock full with them, including like storyboards and rough like CGI for a completely different ending scene involving a swimming pool.
So I read about this where, they had the majority of that scene done and they screened it and apparently didn't do well.
Right.
But I mean, personally, I love the ending that they have in the movie.
And like they did so many fantastic things with this movie. Like what was some of the great things were that some of the things were understated in the right ways, and some of the things were super over the top. Like you look at the stoners of Devon Sawa and Seth Green and P-Nub and Mick and Anton, they're stoners, but it's not their entire personality. Like you see them smoke, so you know that they're high, but it's not like this. It's not this over the top comedic, like closed eyes, can't complete a sentence high. Like they portray, which I can only assume at the time that Seth Green and Devon Sawa probably smoked a ton of weed. And so they very much portray this. Yeah, we smoke, but also like, we have lives to live and we got to do shit occasionally. And so that part of it's very understated. But then you get Vivica A. Fox playing this druidic priestess demon hunter who like, this is her. And like her character is so over the top and she's tearing ass in this airstream.
She reminded me of Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis.
Yeah.
It's just like, this one track mind, Michael must be destroyed sort of thing, and I love that scene where like up until now you think that like she's got this amazing plan. Yes, this awesome ritual that's gonna happen, where the hand's gonna like shrivel up and and she finds him and it's like, oh, okay, I know exactly what to do. And she pulls out this knife and it's like, kill it. I'm like, holy
The host
fuck,
must die.
what?
And she
That
just
was
got a
that was your
dagger.
plan this whole time?
Yes. And it's so, and then what's even funnier about like the characters and things like that and just making this movie hilarious are Jack Noseworthy, who
Yeah.
is a stellar actor. And like he always has a bit part. Like as soon as anybody sees this guy's face, you're like, I know that guy from what, right? And then you
He's
go
that
look.
guy from That Thing.
Yeah, and then you go look and it's like, oh, he's been a bit part in a million things. He plays this guy named Randy who seems set up to be like the most two-dimensional character ever. And he ends up being like a pretty dynamic and fun character. Like you see him working on his truck and drinking a beer, and it's like, oh, okay, I get it, right?
He's
And then
that guy.
he's that guy. But then he ends up like actually like kind of falling for Vivica A. Fox, not just trying to like sleep with her and being very helpful to her. Like he like gives her CPR after she gets hit by a truck, and he's
got the barf breath.
yeah. Just like every time you think you know what you're going to get out of one of these characters, it's just a little bit less or a little bit more, and it makes it feel more realistic and fun. On our Instagram page, Q was like so excited when I put up our schedule and had Idle Hands on there. And exactly what I said was, I haven't seen it in so long. I'm so ready to turn it on and cringe. And honestly, I turned it on and I just laughed. There were almost no like, I was never like in tears laughing, but I mean, I was constantly just chuckling. It was funny from beginning to end. The movie opens with Fred Willard and Ma Torkelson. Like you can't, it's just, there's so many great
Fred
little
Willard's
things.
face and immediately start to laugh.
Absolutely. 100% of the time.
And he plays this role so straight.
Yes.
Which to me is not very Fred Willard. Right, he's always goofy and he's always over the top, and to see him play this role so straight was like all at once weird, but even more funny. I think, and I think possibly my favorite gag in the whole movie involved Fred Willard, although it probably wasn't him and it was just like a body. When Mick sees them laying on the floor, he starts pounding on his chest, right?
Yes.
And Anton pushes him. He goes, "What are you doing, man? That's my dad."
Yeah, I mean, it's just so as we're talking about this, so often when you get into the realm of horror comedy, a lot of times when somebody starts to think about horror comedy, what you start to think of are satire and parody movies. But I think that what we have here is a movie that establishes itself very much as a horror movie with a lot of comedic elements. So as we're talking about what makes us laugh, do you feel like calling this comedy horror is accurate? Does it lean more one way or the other? Or is there maybe a different way you might label it?
I always expected... it's weird because I remember from a kid thinking that this was more of a horror movie, seeing the commercials. Now, of course, we're talking about 21 years ago, right? So I remember thinking of this as a horror movie. In the 21 years that followed and hearing about the movie, I thought of it as primarily a comedy. When I finally saw it, I'm like, man, this really kind of meshes well. There's so few movies that I think do horror and comedy on such equal footing and do it this well. Like Return of the Living Dead comes to mind.
Yes.
Evil Dead 2 comes to mind.
Yes.
Shaun of the Dead comes to mind. However, I don't think this is quite as good as either of those movies, but I do think that horror comedy is the way to I mean, it's not a spoof. It's kind of its own thing.
Yeah. Oh, hey, we've got a comment over here from Seth. The comedic horror romp featuring a man versus an unpossessed hand. Where did they get that idea? That's what we were talking. You must have missed the beginning, Seth. We said that this movie was essentially somebody who saw that one scene in Evil Dead 2 and was like, let's do it for a whole movie.
Yeah. So I definitely think that this earns the title comedic horror. Along the same vein as like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Yeah, that's very much where I stand with it, because while I was watching it last night, that was the question that I had banging around in my head. I was like, this is one that I want to bring up. And so I'm waiting, like trying to see, which one is it going to lean towards? What am I going to qualify this as? And honestly, it's so well balanced.
Mhm.
Like they give you some stoner jokes, and then they give you some sort of gory death, or just like a scene that would fit in just any splatterfest of a film. This movie, without being a grindhouse movie, it's very much, it's a drive-in horror movie. Like, this is the type of movie you fill your car with and you go to watch your friends with, or you go watch with your friends, or you fill your living room up and you pour up drinks and everybody just laughs and jokes while you watch it. But then every time you settle into laughing at something or cracking some jokes, then somebody cuts off a hand and throws it into a microwave and you watch it explode. This movie was written, I forget his name all of a sudden. It was written and directed by, his name is Rodman Flender, but he's a Roger Corman protege. He's the guy that Roger Corman... This
makes a whole lot of sense.
There we go. He's the guy that Roger Corman took straight out of college and gave a job to, and was like, you're going to be big. And so he wrote and directed this, and he, like I said, he very perfectly, like, he sets up the horror moments with comedy. Like a good joke can be told, with a straight face the whole time until you get to the punchline, and then the laughter comes, and then everybody lets it wash over them. This almost does the opposite. It sets you at ease with the laughing and the jokes and the buddy movie element of just these three stoners. And then every time you settle in to just like enjoy it and laugh, then something horrible happens. And it's such a great 1-2 punch that I honestly don't feel it leans one way or the other heavily. I do think it blends and meshes these things really well. Devon Sawa's physical comedy through the first half of this movie before he cuts off his hand is
I was really
stellar.
surprised. To me, it was on par with, and I know I'm going to catch a lot of flack for saying this, but the physicality of it reminded me of like a Jim Carrey or a Robin Williams. And I'm not saying he's that funny. All I'm saying is that he was that physical with it. Like I truly bought that his hand was possessed. Yes. He was doing all sorts of like weird things with the
like
hand,
he'd be holding it and it would just, and he's like flicking his fingers and stuff. Yeah.
And the scene where he we've already talked about, grabbing the ass, but where he's finally making out with Jessica Alba, and his hand keeps like trying to choke her and like suffocate her, and he just kind of like whips the sash off of her robe, and he ties his hand, and she's like, oh, kinky, I like it. It's to me, this movie, unlike, like we talked last week about how Hell Night didn't really commit one way or another to being like a gothic ghost story or a slasher movie, and it kind of suffered because of it. Like, it did both things well enough, but not excellently.
Correct.
Right? This is one that like really commits to being both. Like, it doesn't say, okay, so it's going to be a comedy and then there's some scary moments thrown in, or it's going to be a horror movie, but there might be some levity in there. Right? Like, this is truly both of those things. Like, I was watching the opening scene, and the opening scene to me is like, it could have been Scream, or it could have been a Nightmare on Elm Street, or or one of these big slasher movies. It was really tense.
Yes, absolutely.
And I was really surprised by how tense that was. If it hadn't been for the fact that they had these two really comedic actors in there, I probably would have been on the edge of my seat.
Yeah. There's this the scene before when he's in the bedroom with her, when the hand is like dragging him to Molly's house, and he goes, it's like dragging him through the yard, and he like flips over the barrier onto the porch and like springs up, and the hand is ringing the doorbell, and he's fighting his own hand off the doorbell until he then falls backwards back over the railing of the front porch. Like, that moment was so funny. Devon Sawa was so 100% committed to the physical comedy of this whole thing. When he kills Mick and Peanut, and he's trying to carry on a conversation with them the whole time, and it's not that sly like killer, it's okay, we're friends thing. He's genuinely just a guy trying to explain to his friends that they're safe around him while his hand is actively building murder weapons. He's like, so he's talking to Seth Green and he's like, man, we're still friends, this doesn't mean anything. And then his hand like breaks the bottle and then it cuts away and you just hear Seth Green get stabbed. And then he chases Peanut down into the basement and he's talking to him, everything's gonna be fine, and the hand throws the saw blade and decapitates him. It was so well done. Like when he slings the cat, oh my god, I laughed so hard.
My god, that was so I only laughed out loud, like blurted out loud one time. The rest were like light chuckles and like things like that. But laugh out loud, like I had to pause the movie, was that fucking cat. Oh my god, that was so funny.
Yes, and he just grabs the cat and he's like talking and it's just swinging it above his head, and he slings the cat. Just so many fun, goofy things like that. You watch this movie and when you go and look at Devon Sawa's filmography, the guy after this, he did Final Destination, and then basically everything else he did was like indie. But before this, he did Wild America and Casper, right? Mm-hmm. And so for who Devon Sawa was at the time, who in 99, Devon Sawa was still like a front page Tiger Beat guy.
Yeah.
And so to come out and do this movie where it's like he's a stoner and he's filthy and bloody all the time, and it was very anti everything that Devon Sawa was in the media.
He was a heartthrob at the time. It would have been akin to someone like Jonathan Taylor Thomas doing this.
Yes.
Or Leo DiCaprio doing something like this.
And for him to come out and I mean, just he carried weight with the way he did the physical comedy and the way he sold the jokes. And I mean, honestly, it showed so much of what he could do as an actor. Like, I'm not saying he got Final Destination because of this movie, but Final Destination came afterwards.
Yeah.
And, it's easy to look.
It's kind of difficult not to draw that line between this and
exactly.
And Final Destination.
So it's kind of, so it is easy to look at this and be like, if this is why they were willing to put him in Final Destination or talk to him about it, this makes sense because this showed chops. Even if they were being a stoner with a possessed devil hand, it showed chops. It showed that dude could act and he could have a lot of fun and he could carry a movie.
And we've talked a lot about him, but Seth Green and Eldon Hansen as Mick and Peanut, that comedy duo, I could have a sequel that's just them two.
Yes.
And probably be okay with it.
Yes, they were so funny. Like, I mean, like even at the beginning, but once they're dead, like once they're dead and they're still just living the exact same life, like he's throwing the cheese balls like in like his decapitated head, and they decide when my absolute favorite is when Seth Green puts his head on like the big like
that's what I was gonna say,
and he puts it down in his neck. Then he eats the bean burrito, so he duct tapes his neck so the beans don't come out. Like that's just friendship.
I love the way that he's like, the bean dip's coming out, right, and he does this thing where like he dips his fingers into like his rotting neck. He like, okay,
yeah,
and Seth Green's like, I can fix it. And he's just like looking around the house for like whatever he can find to like glue this guy's head back onto his body. And there's the duct tape. And I mean, they really do care for one another. And you can see that they care for Devon Sawa as well, because when Anton kind of comes into their window, you can tell that they've hidden the weed from him.
Yes.
Right. It's like, no, man, like you go too far. There's more to life than this. They tell him like, that there was a Halloween dance if you went to school every once in a while. So like they don't care about grades or anything like that, but they're like, right, what? I mean, you kind of have to graduate, right?
Right.
So they're good friends. They're kind-hearted. I got like major like Sean and Eddie vibes from them, and I'm not saying that this movie is anywhere near Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead is a perfect zombie movie, but in its own way, this kind of is too.
Yeah,
in its own way.
It very very much in its own way, but they get along so well, and they play off of each other so well. My favorite interaction between them is when P-Nub is making out with the girl at the dance, and like Seth Green doesn't he doesn't have anybody, and he's kind of freaked out by it, and he leans in. And he's like, man, you got to stop. One, we're supposed to be finding Molly. And two, I think this is illegal.
I love after that girl's been chopped up by the fan, right? By the cooling fan. And they make it to the fan. And he was like, oh, man, I thought I was going to score tonight. And then he goes to turn. He goes, oh, man, I forgot her name. And Seth Green's like, you can go back and pick her up, dude.
Yeah. Like, I'm not crawling through all this, whatever her name was. It's just this movie really did do an excellent job of marrying those two genres. And I honestly can't think of a better way to describe it. Like, oh, God, just. And like we said, the stoner comedy, the whole thing, like neither one of us are stoners, never really have been. But at the end, they're in like the auto shop room, and they're fighting the hand that's currently in a puppet. Like that's how it's showing emotion and stuff. And they're trying to pull the handle before this car raises to the roof and smashes Jessica Alba. And they find this like huge bong that the auto shop guys have built. And Seth Green grabs it, holds it in the air, goes, Mighty Joe Bong. And then Peanut goes, I needs me spinach. Like just dumb stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's like those are exact conversations that like that is an exact like response I could hear friends that I've had that smoke a lot of weed having.
Yeah. I have a friend, a very close friend, who let's just call him a living, breathing nug, right?
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. He has said those words before in that respect, right? Talking about the devil's lettuce, as it were, right? Yeah, this manages to be really funny.
Yeah.
And gory. I mean, the gore in the movie is actually pretty good. You mentioned splatter earlier. Like I was waiting for it because at this point, like we're more than halfway through the movie. I know what to expect now. But it was still so great to see the hand explode in the microwave, at this point we've seen, eyeballs get eaten by cats. We've seen, heads get lopped off, and also I have to say this, the special effects in this movie hold up quite well.
Yeah, they really do. This movie, like the body count in this movie is good. I mean, like all things considered, the body count in this movie is high. I mean, you've got both the Anton's parents get killed. Yep. You see, even though they continue to be in the movie, you see Seth Green and P-Nub die. You've got the girl who gets chopped up by the fan. You've got the couple in the car. You've got all the people that get crushed.
Oh, what a great death when the hand crawls up.
Oh my God, to Ace Frehley. Frehley of all things, but as they're dressed as Kiss characters, but yeah, the hand like crawling up her bare chest.
That was Shane, not Shane Black, Ian Black, right?
Was it?
I'm pretty sure that was Ian Black. Let me look that up, but I'm almost certain that the guy who was in the Paul Stanley makeup was Ian Black.
I'm not seeing him like just on the regular cast, but I'm not seeing whoever that character was either. But it does. There's the gore in this movie and the body count and just the ways that they go about killing people are equally creative and fun. Like just we don't actually see how Anton's mom gets killed, but we see her get pulled under the bed and the whole bed shake and then blood just splatter everywhere.
Yeah.
Great opening scene, right? You still don't know who or what the killer is. You just know that the killer is brutal. You've got Peanut's head getting chopped off with a thrown circular saw blade, like we talked about, the broken beer bottle in Seth Green's head. The principal of the school, while he's on the phone sex line,
great
and the hand
death.
crawls up his leg and I guess just rips his crotch off and he bleeds to death.
You know what? At that point, I hope I do. I hope I can't live without it.
But personal favorite, the best kill in this movie, Dexter Holland of The Offspring, while performing at the Halloween dance. The hand drops down from the heavens of the high school gym, grabs him by that blonde hair that we all know and love as Offspring fans, and just rips back with such ferocity that it completely and totally scalps him. And Dexter Holland just hits falls the ground. So great. Like, that's the one. I had completely forgotten about that. Like, when I saw him, I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. The Offspring performed. I completely forgot that Dexter was going to die. And so then it drops down.
You know that
shit.
You know that meme that everyone uses of Leo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, of him pointing at the screen?
Yes.
Right? That was me when The Offspring came on. I was like, The Offspring. I was just like, holy fuck. They are my favorite punk band. They are like one of my all-time favorite bands. So to see them in this movie, I gotta be honest, I didn't recognize the whole band, but I did recognize him and Noodles.
Noodles, yeah.
And I was like, fuck, I love this band so much. And to hear them, play was it the Ramones that they started off playing?
Yeah, they were playing I Want to Be Sedated.
Yeah, I fucking love that song. And what an apt song.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what needs to happen. They need to sedate this fucking hand,
But yeah, like, and it's just, and like you were talking about the special effects holding up. Well, I mean, it's a really good special effect of ripping back and seeing his skull, and you're right, the special effects hold up, and we fall back on this so many times, but it's because so much of what we saw were practical effects.
Yeah.
And that stuff is going to age better than CGI, which is constantly getting better. So if you see 20-year-old CGI, it feels bad. But the practical effects of ripping someone's head open are always going to look the same, maybe look a little bit better.
Yeah. And especially if it's done on film.
Yeah.
If you're using film stock instead of digital film, it's always going to be the sort of thing where you can keep upping the resolution. And if this was done on the 30 millimeter or something like that, like this can look really good. And I think you and I saw it on Pluto TV, right? This is something you can stream for free.
Yes, you can stream for free on Pluto TV. I went ahead and just paid the $3 to rent it from Amazon.
Oh, okay. Did you?
Yeah.
It gave me an opportunity to keep going up and refilling my little bowl of candy corn. This is the only time of year that you can purchase it without having to buy in bulk online. So I just go nuts.
Sidebar, do you ever just throw some peanuts in there?
No.
It's a game changer. Game changer.
I think I'm doing that tonight.
I spent a long time not liking candy corn. Now I'm fine with it. I'll eat candy corn. But man, a bowl of candy corn, like 2 parts candy corn, 1 part like dry roasted peanut, or honey roasted works too. I prefer dry roasted, so you get a little salty with your sweet.
Yeah.
Game changer.
I do like sweet and savory.
Yeah.
I'm that kind of guy. Down here in Miami, you get a lot of like churros with salted caramel. Oh yeah.
I like the idea of that. But yeah, so I did pay the $3 to rent it from Amazon. And like I said, but I'm honestly considering buying like the Blu-ray now to check out the special features.
It's always worth it.
And like I said, this seems like the type of movie where it definitely would be, because this is the type of movie that I would be willing to bet everybody involved looks back on this movie fondly, and they probably all really enjoy looking back on this movie. Had to have been fun to make. Yeah, like it's just there's no way it wasn't. And like us, and in the gore that comes across so well, because it's always interesting how fine the line is between a movie like this where somebody gets chopped to bits by a fan blade and it's gory but also kind of funny, and an Eli Roth movie, where somebody gets busted open with, like a circular saw, and it's like, that's a lot. And so it's like, while they're very similar things, the package that it's presented in can have so much effect on how you view the gore and the horror of something, and all of the deaths, which, like we said, they don't hold back on the splatter and the gore. No. When that girl gets chopped to bits by that fan, we initially get an overhead shot of Jessica Alba getting absolutely covered in this girl and blood. And then we also get a shot of the two coming through the air duct behind her and seeing her splattered everywhere. And it's still lighthearted. It's so weird how they accomplish that, but it still remains lighthearted.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they weren't looking to gross you out. The goal here was for you to, I think, to just be entertained. Yeah, and entertainment comes in many different ways, but when your goal is like gross out, you can only rely on like very few tools, and the delivery method for that has to be something that's gross, which is why you can't watch something like Human Centipede, for example, and really laugh throughout the movie, because it is so
enjoy
gross.
Yourself at all.
Right.
I've seen 2 of the 3 Human Centipede movies. I will say that. I don't know that I enjoyed them, but I also didn't turn them off.
Right. I mean, there is that sort of like human curiosity that's in there, where it's like, I want to see this through, but the way that this is presented here, it's entertainment. It's pure entertainment. And, it's almost like Hollywood at its best,
And speaking of Hollywood at its best, the reason for that, the special effects coordinator for this movie was Greg Canham. And even if that name doesn't sound familiar, let me explain to you some Oscars that Greg Canham has won. Greg Canham has won Oscars for Best Makeup and Special Effects for Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Mrs. Doubtfire, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and Vice, that movie about Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
He was the special effects coordinator and makeup guy on all of those movies. This guy has got a actual shelf full of Oscars. That's who did this movie. He, by the way, he also did the special effects. He was nominated for Titanic and Hook, but didn't win. Like, so it's like you look at this movie and, like we've said, 15%, $4 million in box office, but there were some names like we were talking about. Devon Sawa was the top of his game, but this guy is an Academy Award-winning special effects guy, and they got exactly what they wanted: entertaining gore.
The movie looks like they had an Academy Award-winning special effects artist on it.
Yeah,
the makeup, the effects on the hand, the actor who played the demonic hand is the same guy who played Thing in Addams Family.
Christopher Hart.
Yeah, and yet I saw that name and I was like, why does that name sound familiar? And so I looked it up, and sure enough, it's Thing from the Addams Family movies in the early 90s. And like, fuck, it to me, the hand movements were so different.
Yeah.
Somehow this guy is able to act with his hand. Like, it's not just that he's got a pretty hand. I don't have pretty hands. I could never do Hollywood with these hands. I can play guitar. You've got nice looking hands.
Thanks.
Yeah. And there's actually some behind the scenes stuff that you can find on YouTube where Jessica Alba talks about his hands and how creepy they are, but like only when the makeup's on them. It's kind of interesting. But the makeup effects just for like a hand.
Yeah.
That's something that today would have been done with CGI, and you lose out so much of that.
Yeah, like, it was funny because while I was watching it last night, once the hand becomes separate and it's moving around, in my notes, I just wrote Thing. I didn't realize it was the same actor. I was just like, man, this is real. Like the sound that it made when it was moving, like the sound was very similar, and it moved very similar to Thing. So then today I'm doing some research, and I was like, well, I'll be goddamn.
Yeah,
it's because it is Thing. It's just Thing that's been microwaved,
right?
And I mean, and God, man, you're talking about special effects. That scene, like where they just show you the hand in the microwave and it starts to slowly bubble. Like they don't just have it blow up like a hot dog in the microwave. It starts to slowly bubble
and squirt blood out of certain spots. Oh, it's so good. It's juicy. It's like a hot dog slowly being overcooked.
Yes. And then going back to the comedic element of it, Seth Green opens the microwave, the hand shoots out, and Peanut goes, should we clean it first? Because it's full of blood and they're about to cook a microwave. He goes, yeah, why don't we just clean the whole fucking house while we're at it? And he just slings the burrito in the blood-filled microwave.
And then I love the follow-up to that scene. Devon Sawa comes back and he kind of peeks into the microwave. He's like slams the door open. He goes, you let it out. Or he doesn't say you let it out right away. He's like, oh, fuck. And Peanut is like, I'm sorry, man. They only had 2 burritos. No, you let the hand out.
Yeah, exactly. But but then for the rest of the movie, when we see the hand, it's like, okay, it's been scorched in a microwave, right?
And it's had its fingernails filed down by a pencil sharpener.
When he puts his fingers in the pencil sharpener and he's got the nails, like I remember as a kid. Like, as an adult, like you become very aware of like what intrusive thoughts are, right?
Uh-huh.
But I remember as a kid, like every time I ever used an electric pencil sharpener, being like, I wonder what happened if I stuck my finger in there.
Yeah, you're not alone. You're not alone in that.
And so now you get this movie where you watch a hand and it's like, oh, it just sharpens it until the bone is a point. Cool.
There you go. Yeah.
But it's just the gore and the deaths in this movie, like I said earlier, so much of it is set up. Even like I said, my favorite death, Dexter Holland getting his head ripped off. That's set up with him like shit talking Devon Sawa for like rushing the stage, right? Like he's like pushing Devon Sawa off the stage and like talking shit to him about like coming up on stage while they're performing, and then his head gets ripped off.
But he pushes him. He goes, "Get off the stage, loser."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, and just so many times, every time there's a death in this movie, it's preempted with a funny moment. And it's such a great 1-2 punch. And the laughs are good. And the gore is a really great, like, right cross. Like the laughs are the jab, right? Like you said, only 1 or 2 maybe laugh out loud moments, but a lot of chuckles. So you're always relaxed. You're never on edge waiting. Those are the jabs. And then when this death comes in, the gore are just these massive hooks that just come flying over, and there's blood everywhere.
And they make you go, oh, as much as they make you laugh immediately afterwards. It's like when you fail to do a backflip and you really hurt yourself, but you're also laughing at yourself.
Yes.
There we go. That sort of thing. I'm glad that you mentioned Dexter again, because you got the Offspring, they're playing the Ramones, like the music in this movie. Like you are like, just it's bombastic right from the very beginning, because from the very beginning you've got what was the first song that they play?
Very early in the movie they play Blood Clot by Rancid.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it's followed by like Santeria.
Yes.
And it's like one right after the other, and it's like, holy fuck. And then you've got oh my God, was it Randy? His name, Noseworthy's character.
Yes, Randy. He's constantly playing Shout at the Devil.
He's always playing Shout at the Devil. I'm like, fuck, I love me some Motley Crue.
God, such a good song.
How did you feel about the music in this movie?
So since I've been doing Shiver, when we've looked at music for movies, we are most of the time looking at scores.
Right.
We are looking at music that is setting up moments and building a mood. This is the first movie we've looked at that's got like a soundtrack since I've been doing it. I know you guys
Mhm.
did Return of the Living Dead, which is just a chef's kiss of the soundtrack. And
We'll
I know
get
you
back
guys,
around to that. It deserves to be done again.
Yeah, I know that you guys did that one without me, but since I've been doing it, like I said, we look at scores and how this sets up moments. The soundtrack to this movie ends up doing a couple of things. One, very much claiming like its place in time, right? Like a Static X, right? Yes.
Oh,
The,
yes.
Late 90s, early
Push it.
2000s. Push
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Yes. It's
I remember
Static X.
Oh man, I remember that music video and being creeped out by the music
Oh,
video.
Wayne's, yeah.
But also being like totally into what I was seeing. I'm like, yeah, push it.
Yeah, Wayne Static was such an interesting like character as
Yeah.
the lead singer, right? But yeah, you've got that. You've got Rancid play. You got Two Live Crew.
Yes.
With Pop That Coochie playing, right? You've got there's so many great things like just in this movie. There are so many songs that play, so many songs that are on this. Like I went Dragula, which
yes,
honestly, if you're ever goddamn, if you're doing a horror movie and you're gonna have a soundtrack, find a way to squeeze Dragula in there. Just do it for me.
Yeah,
just do it for me. It won.
You can never go wrong with Rob Zombie.
Oh, absolutely. But so it one, it cements its place in time as you hear these songs. But two, it does something. We talk about score building the mood and building tension in very much the opposite way. That it lulls you into this false sense of security that you're watching just another teen comedy. You know, that you're watching just another teen movie. It's like, oh, I listened to that song. And so you're lulled into this false sense of security of this just being a movie about some teenagers. But the thing, I think the thing that sticks out so much about this particular soundtrack is how much it speaks to, really the two of us. I mean, like it's easy to go back and find a teen movie with the soundtrack that's music that me and you will be like, yeah, sure, that song exists. Like I remember it. But like when you look at this, Zebrahead is on this soundtrack. The Offspring covering the Ramones.
It's such a weird combination of like post-hardcore and post-punk, but with punk. It is what I was listening to at that time.
Yeah.
And all my stoner friends were listening to shit like this. I mean, Sublime is the national band of Weedonia.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt. And then, like I said, but then they throw in some other things that. So when we talked about the gore, there's a couple who's making out in a car and the hand kills them, and they're dressed like Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, which is great, and they're wearing Kiss shirts because they're going to a costume party. Fantastic. If you're not super familiar with Kiss's library, especially when they went solo, the song that's playing is Back in the New York Groove, which is an Ace Frehley song that you would only know if you're my dad, who's one of the 3 people who owns the Ace Frehley solo album.
Which is really good.
It's really not bad. It's really not. Frehley's Comet is also not a terrible band, but that's for another podcast. But so then they do little things like that where it's like, hey, they're just like Kiss, and here's this girl's boobs, and they're gonna get murdered, and they're listening to Ace Frehley. There's so many jokes here. Like it's just,
which, by the way, it's the only pair of boobs you see in the entire movie.
It really is.
To go back to this idea that it has aged really well. We are living in a time now where I think most horror movies have kind of moved past this idea that you need to have like this sexualization of women.
That's why when we do old slashers, we always do boobs and blood because it was a staple of the old slasher.
But like, for example, like the new Halloween movies, at least the last one. I haven't seen the new one yet. It's not out, but there was no sexualization of anyone in that movie. And I think it was all the better for it.
Except for up here, every time I see Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh boy.
I don't care how old she gets. Like, she's always gonna be Scream Queen, True Lies, Jamie Lee Curtis to me. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't care how old Jamie Lee Curtis gets up here. It's always Scream Queen, and it's always True Lies.
Yep. Prom Night, Terror Train.
Oh.
Did you ever see Terror Train?
Yes.
It's such an underrated one.
Yeah, we need to do Terror Train sometime.
So good. David Copperfield's in that fucking movie.
Absolutely. But yeah, but you're absolutely right. Like they've moving past the idea of, as we sit here fawning over Jamie Lee Curtis, who's I don't even know how old now, but I know she's well older than both of us. But you're right. That is one of the things that helps the movie age well. And the thing is, it's not gratuitous boobs.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. Like they're high schoolers making out in a car.
Right.
When I was a high schooler making out with a car, I was trying to see some boob.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
It makes sense there. It's not just, it's not just a scene of like a girl on the phone being topless in the mirror for no reason.
Right.
It makes sense in the context of why her boobs are out.
I was watching Night of the Creeps. Was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday. I'm asking you as if you know when I watched Night of the Creeps last.
Yes, it was. Yes.
Thank you. And there's a scene where I forget the actress's name, but she's getting changed in her room, and we're seeing her from the back, right? And it's like, okay, well, she's got underwear on, no bra, but she's getting dressed facing her closet as one would, right? If you were going to pick out an outfit. But then she turns around so we can see her boobies. and it's like, okay, well, this is just Fred Decker having fun on set. He knows that this is going to sell some tickets, right? And listen, I'm not complaining, but it's unnecessary.
Right.
You don't need it, right? This made sense within the context of that scene. Like they're teenagers getting it on. They're at a school party,
Yeah.
Everyone got to prom, right? And this isn't prom, but everyone got to these parties either late or early because you were going to get it on.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on in this car.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, and like I said, just it, going back to the soundtrack of it all, that was when that song played, I was like, oh my God, this is such a great joke, because like I said, it's not even technically a Kiss song. It's just an Ace Frehley song. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and so it's such like a 3 layers deep joke that I would venture to say that in 1999, this joke shot over the heads of 99% of the 16 to 21 year olds watching this movie. Like I said, I just happen to be the son of a man who owns both Frehley's Comet albums and Ace Frehley's solo album. So as soon as I hear it, I'm like, oh, I get it. It's back in the New York groove.
This is how you know who the real talent in Kiss was, by the way, because when Ace Frehley left, their sound completely changed. They had to take off the makeup to keep selling tickets and keep selling records. Ace Frehley still sounded like Kiss.
If you're not a Kiss fan, you heard it here on Shiver first. Vinny Carr's good. He's no Ace Frehley.
No. Come on.
I'm just saying, look, we may have listeners out there that don't listen to Kiss. So let this be your lesson in the fact, Vinny Carr good, Ace Frehley far superior.
Oh yeah.
So what's even great about when we're talking just soundtrack, this is tangentially related to soundtrack, but there are 2, one uncredited and one actually credited. If you watch through, there are 2 musical cameos in this movie that are blink and you miss them cameos, and they're in the same scene. There's a scene where they're having a vigil outside of Jungle Burger, where these 2 twins were killed, and we eventually find out.
Killed off camera. You see their ears.
So they're having a vigil outside of this because obviously that's what you do when twins work.
What a great reveal, by the way, of this Jungle Burger bag falling over, and then French fries and ears come pouring out of the bag.
And Seth Green immediately realizing, ooh, it's 2 left ears. That means it's from 2 people. Like,
what's the logic behind this?
And then they immediately draw the line to it's the twins. But so he's trying to get Randy to tell him about the devil, because Randy's always listening to Shout at the Devil by Motley Crue. Obviously, this guy knows about the devil. And so Randy blows him off, and he's going through the drive-thru. So he like grabs he grabs the uniform from the vigil. It belongs to one of the dead twins,
which he has murdered.
Right. And he knows at this point. He puts it on and bursts into this burger joint to try to get to the drive-thru. He bumps into one guy who's Kyle Gass from Tenacious D.
I missed that one.
And then he goes to the drive-thru. That's the uncredited one. I recognize that one. The next one I did not recognize. He goes to the drive-thru window and he goes, "Hey, it's break time." And the guy working the drive-thru, Tom DeLonge from Blink-182.
That one I caught. That
one I didn't catch. I saw that one in the credits. Kyle Gass, I recognize though. And so like it just goes to show how tied into the popular culture the creators of this movie were. Even if it was the popular, I don't want to, the word counterculture is so thrown around. But at the time, in 1999, Blink-182 was becoming culture. Like that was around, it wasn't quite
they had
Enema of the State, but I believe that was Dude Ranch
of the
time.
State. Yeah, Dude Ranch was out, but Enema of the State was not. And Tenacious D was still, I mean, just short of underground.
Yeah, exactly. Like they had the TV show, and yeah, like I said, and when you have Dude Ranch, you've got Damn It, you've got Josie. Those are both, those are both good hits for if you listen to rock radio. So it really does. So like I said, counterculture might not be the right word, but it does show how tied into their audience and that they knew who was going to be watching this movie, and they went with cameos that would mean something to the people who were watching this movie. And that all just goes back to the soundtrack creation. They knew who was going to be watching this movie and who they were appealing to. On the actual soundtrack, not actually in the movie, but the Vandals, which like the Vandals were one of they're an oi punk band, but they were one of like my gateway punk bands. And they had a song called "My Girlfriend's Dead" that didn't actually make the movie, but is on the soundtrack. Like they were another one.
That's such a weird thing, man. Remember when? I mean, I always remember going and buying soundtracks to movies. And like you'd go to like Specs or wherever it is that you bought your music, and you'd specifically look out for like these blockbuster movies that had these amazing soundtracks.
I mean, forever.
That had listen, I will die on the hill of Batman Forever. All right, first of all.
I'm just saying, it's a good soundtrack.
Second of all, it has a fantastic soundtrack, right?
U2, Seal, PJ Harvey, get the fuck out of here. Great soundtrack.
Yeah,
Flaming Lips.
Seal alone.
Yeah.
Seal alone. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that was something that doesn't really happen anymore. This idea that there were bands that were contracted to like write music for a soundtrack, even if it wasn't in the movie. I love that, and this movie's kind of a time capsule for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, that Offspring doing "I Want to Be Sedated" cover doesn't exist anywhere except for this movie. I went and tried to find it. I went and looked around and tried to find Offspring doing "I Want to Be Sedated," and it seems to solely exist in the bubble that is the movie of Idle Hands. And you know what?
Or live shows. Yeah,
it was a pretty goddamn good cover.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. If you're a punk band, then you could probably do a good cover of any Ramones song. The Ramones, spectacular, monumental in the realm of punk. But if you're a punk band, you can probably do a good Ramones cover. But they did a great cover of it, and they put it on film. So good for the Offspring.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just the soundtrack of this movie did so much to move the movie along, to make it better, to have fun with it. But also, like I said, it just cemented it as like in its place in time in a way that nothing but a soundtrack could do.
And that's something where I think like the sense of humor and the simplicity and the sexism of like 80s slashers placed them firmly in the 80s. These like 90s teen movies, of which I think that this sits firmly among them. Like
absolutely,
this wouldn't be out of place in a like a marathon that you're also throwing like Not Another Teen Movie and American Pie.
Yeah,
the soundtrack is a part of it.
Yeah.
And it dates it to the 90s.
Yes. Speaking of things that date it to the 90s, Randy with the double tribal armband tattoo. Double.
Yeah.
My man has 2 tribal armband tattoos. Like, you want to talk about, oh, I definitely know this movie was made in the late 90s. Yeah. 2 tribal armband tattoos.
and Seth Green's spiked up hair, that gel hair.
Yo.
I mean, if that doesn't scream 90s at you.
So I have if you don't know me outside of this podcast, but you watch this on here, it may be something that you're not aware of because I always wear a hat. That's very much on purpose. I'm bald. My hair is very thin. I shave my head now. But when I was younger and I wasn't bald, I always wanted long hair. By the way, if you head to Instagram, ShiverPod, or no, actually, I didn't post it on our Instagram. I posted it to our Facebook, facebook.com/ShiverPod. You can catch a picture of Dave with flowing, luxurious locks, absolutely wailing on a guitar.
Thank you for that, by the way.
I had fun with that one. I was never able to grow long hair because as soon as my hair starts to grow out, it curls, right? Like I get the flip, which now is like cool if you're in high school for your hair to flip out under your hat. Well, when I was in high school, it wasn't, so I had to have short hair. But I was the king of the spiked hair. I went through so many I went through so many spiked hairstyles. I am so utterly familiar with late 90s, early 2000s hair care products. I have used Elmer's glue. I have used stuff called hair paste. I'm that was my punk kid aesthetic, was like, however much hair I have, I'm going to stand it straight up.
Oh yeah.
and you're right. Seth Green, absolutely. He does so often in his movies, going back to Clueless even.
Yes. But Austin Powers.
Yes, Austin Powers. But yeah, like Seth Green absolutely embodied that.
Did you do the visor off to the side? No, see, that was
visor was a little too preppy for me.
See, that was my crowd. Because I went to one of these preppy high schools, and everyone was doing the visor just slightly off to the side with the hair spiked out. And everyone's smelling like Abercrombie and Fitch. I couldn't afford the Abercrombie and Fitch, so I smelled like Hollister instead.
Yeah. I had a Structure phase, if you remember Structure.
I do remember
it was
Structure.
Like limited or express for dudes.
Right.
So I did have a Structure phase in high school. I was always too chubby for Abercrombie and Fitch, but Structure appealed to the more heavy set high school.
Well, I am definitely chubby now, but back then I was a swimmer and had a swimmer's body, and could definitely rock the Hollister and Abercrombie stuff, and it did so quite well, I think.
Nice.
Although you look back on that time period, I don't think the fashion has aged well. However, you look at the movies and nostalgia just overwhelming.
Dude,
the fashion in this movie is the other thing that I think is like, oh man, like you got the music, you've got that sense of humor, which I think is like distinctly 90s, and that fashion, right? Jessica Alba's hair, could very easily have like come off of Jennifer Aniston
and Friends.
Off the set of Friends, and then just transplant it on her, and that's what you got going on.
Absolutely. At one point, Devin Sawa shows up to the basement with Seth Green, and he's going to return the songbook to Molly, Jessica Alba, and he's just wearing like boxer shorts, and they're like, do you want to borrow a pair of jeans, first appearances and all? And what does he grab? Motherfucking Jinkos.
Yeah.
I can put these on at the waist, or I can slide into the leg of these. It's like, yo, and as much as I want to sit here and joke about Jinkos, I was a Jinkos guy. I was very much a Jinkos guy, but you're right. The fashion of this, like, she shows up to the dance, and I mean, granted, this is just stereotypical hot girl, Halloween costume.
Yeah.
But she's an angel in like a mini dress with just a pair of wings on, but
it's a nightie. That's all she's
exactly.
in lingerie.
But I mean, they're just wearing, just hoodies and big everything's big, right? In the 90s, guys, everything we wore was big. You just wanted to hide any, but like you had a swimmer's body, but I bet you hid it decently under stuff. I was a fat guy, so I hid it under corn t-shirts and Jinko.
It was Jinko and Fubu. I don't know if you wore Fubu.
I was not a Fubu guy. But yeah, I was a Jinko guy, and basically anything I could pick up at a Pac Sun.
Pac Sun, yeah, remember the Pac Sun? Yeah.
Like, see, I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So, I shopped at Pac Sun, and I shopped at beach shops a lot. So I owned a lot of Massimo, a lot of Lost, a lot of Quicksilver, a lot of Billabong.
Had a lot of Quicksilver, a lot of Massimo. Man, the 90s was a great time to be around.
Man, I saw a thing. We're completely derailing the show here, but whatever. We've only been going for an hour. I saw a TikTok trend. So it's like it's funny because they look back and it's like when we were in high school, they do like 80s nights, and that made sense. I saw a thing on TikTok now. They're doing 2000s days for like homecoming, and like high schoolers are like, I'm gonna dress like the late 90s, early 2000s. I'm like, oh my god, that was long enough now that people are being nostalgic about it. But then again, here we are talking, waxing poetically about a movie that came out 22 years ago. So
yeah, it's So
there
you go.
There we go. Exactly. We're getting old. We're having fun. We hope that you listening are enjoying it. And it's come to that time where we've got to rate this movie. We went through a couple of different things. We kicked around some obvious options, but I'm going to throw it out there because it's my favorite kill in the movie. It's a band that I absolutely adore. I do love The Offspring. Dave even said he loves them too. So we are going to go, Dave, on a scale out of X out of 5 scalped pop punk lead singers. What do you give the movie Idle Hands?
I was really confused because I saw the movie and I'm like, man, I really love this movie. And throughout the day, I kept bouncing this back and forth. And I was like, well, I mean, it's a horror comedy, it doesn't take itself too seriously. And then I kept going back to the thing that we keep talking about, how it's like, you know what? You got to judge a movie based on itself. The movie is what it is and not what it isn't. And for that reason, I'm giving this 5 scalped pop punk singers, because what movie is not 5 scalped pop punk singers, if not a movie where the pop punk singer gets scalped, number one, right? That has never happened in another movie, right? Where you have a 2-boobied girl, right? Because there are movies where there are 3 boobied girls, but where a 2-boobied girl gets felt up by 3 hands.
3 hands.
Right? Where you have a hand that gets microwaved and the special effects are so good that you keep rewinding that scene to watch over and over again. Where Fred Willard is forced out of bed to check on his son, who he says couldn't scoot his ass to save his life. Yes. Right? I mean, this is a perfect fucking horror comedy, man. And I kind of said it at the beginning of the show, and I was wondering if I meant it, that it's perfect in its own way. And I really do think it's perfect in its own way.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I say this almost every time we go to rate a movie, but when I go to rate a movie individually, I only rate it against itself and what I think that movie could have brought to the table. And I occasionally feel a twinge of guilt when I rate something above something else. And so when I say this, I'm fully aware of the fact that technically by the numbers, I am rating this movie higher than The Shining, but that is why we change the metric every time.
Right.
I'm not rating this against, I don't even remember what we did for The Shining, honestly, top of my head. I don't remember what the metric was. But when we're talking out of 5 scalped pop punk singers, when we're talking about a movie that so perfectly is aware of what it is, when we're talking about a movie that 22 years later can still make me laugh, and I can still enjoy it, and I can still be kind of wowed by the special effects, and I can sit back and just enjoy this movie. Like, honestly, if next week, if I had some friends over and we were drinking and wanted to watch, they were like, let's watch a Halloween movie, but something kind of funny, I would rent or buy this again, because I would be like, have you ever seen Idle Hands? No, let's go. I'm giving it 5. I'm giving it 5 scalped pop punk lead singers, because it's so perfectly aware of what it is. And it leans into the joke when it's supposed to lean into the joke. And it gives us gore when it's supposed to give us gore. And it's so highly entertaining from beginning to end. There's never a moment. I was completely satisfied in this movie. And I've seen this movie before and still didn't pick up my phone. Like, I watched the movie and I loved it. And it was so much fun. And I was so ready to cringe and just be like reminded of the late 90s and the bad jokes. But damn it, the movie did exactly what it was supposed to do. It holds up 22 years later. And I even when I suggested this movie, I did not expect to go back and rewatch it and give it this, but I'm giving it a 5 too. I loved it. I loved it so much. It was exactly what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, I can't imagine it being anything other than this, you know. And if anyone were to rate it lower than a 5, I don't know that we could be friends. Just putting it out there. All right. If you watch this movie and you don't like it, I don't think we can be friends.
Yeah, because
I can
exactly
like you.
What it's supposed to be.
I can like you. I think I like almost everybody, except you. You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking to you. All right. But almost everyone else, I like you. But if you can't sit down and appreciate this movie, not sure we can be friends.
Just from top to bottom, comedy, gore, soundtrack, acting, it hit every single note it was supposed to hit. Mm-hmm. And if we're judging every movie against itself, if it's not this idea that that a 5 is just this perfect movie, it's just a 5 is just a movie that is exactly what it's supposed to be, then that's exactly what this movie is.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. So with that said and done, we invite you to come back next week, where we will be talking about Trick or Treat.
Ooh.
One of
we've given you comedy this week, but we're coming hard with horror next week. Hard with the horror.
And the Halloween. I think so. We've kind of like slowly leaned into Halloween. We're building up to that Halloween flair, right? But Trick or Treat lays it on thick, and it's all the better for it.
Oh yeah.
So we've got some special guests up next week. We've got the amazing artist and he's absolutely incredible. Look him up. Attack Peter will be here next week with another great artist in her own right. She's got some artistic stuff she does on her own. Double Treble. They'll be here next week reviewing Trick or Treat with us. So please make sure that you tune into that. Make sure you tune into all of the Geek Bro podcasts. We've got Mount Geekmore with yours truly, Daniel DeBona, and myself. I should be back there next week, or the week after.
Week after will be the next time.
Yeah. So that'll be nice. I can finally come back in after fulfilling some long-standing agreements there. We've got What's Up Bro, we've got Seasons, we've got Comedy Fitness, we've got Kick Flicks,
we've got Crimacopia, the new one, doing international cults for season 1.
Yeah, former co-host and occasional guest Jeff is on that one with the ever lovely, talented, and witty Q is on that one. Very special. If you're a fan of horror, you got to be a fan of true crime. They kind of just go hand in hand. So check out Crimacopia. Check out Comedy Fitness. Check out A Dose of Ellie. Check out Childlike at Best.
There we go. A shout out to Missing Sock Network. They're a different podcast network, but Mike Mercadal, who is a regular at this point on Mount Geekmore, he does some shows over at Missing Sock. We've also had some great guests recently from The Floor is Dungeon, which is another podcast over on that network.
And make sure to check out Better Let Me Tell You, another Geek Bro Network podcast.
With Ish, who will be back in 2 weeks for a movie that we'll tell you about next week.
Yeah. Ish. And we got to see if we can get DJ on.
We got to get DJ
He is vehemently anti-horror, yet his favorite horror movie is The Shining.
So he understands how it works.
He understands how it works, and he's a smart guy. He's a funny guy, and you know, I like him an awful lot. So, and nepotism will get you everywhere.
Hey, so. We're easily bought.
On behalf of all of us here on Shiver, a horror movie podcast, fright you very much.